Alright, I'm back with some ill-deserved confidence and a right of reply first from Mr. Lucas Thorn, author, from my previous video. Wool sales are a thing, and he just wanted everyone to know that. He did some research on this. I think he put boat into Wikipedia or something like this. And the name Skur was a complete accident. He didn't mean it to be a Swedish word, and it'll probably never happen again, so I don't need to worry about giving Thorn any credit for cultural references or indeed any form of culture from now on. Now, I'm going to go straight ahead with this next chapter. It is chapter 1 of his new book, which is coming out fairly soon, isn't it, Lucas? It's called Sea of Revenants. Sea of Revenants. The Blue Ox was wide of belly and with a long curving keel rising to an elegant dragon figurehead at the prow. A single mast bore the wide square sail, straining to cling to the wind and propel the vessel through wave and spray with urgency. One wonders why a dragon figurehead boat is called the Blue Ox. Is it a Paul Bunyan reference? I sure hope so. Maybe someone will make a horrible pun about Paul Bunyan. Let's read and find out, shall we? Large enough to crew roughly 30 men, it now carried 12, and one elf. Ooh, did the elf drink everyone's blood like Skur did? Because that guy was a dick, really, seriously. And what happened to the confused troll? I want closure on the confused troll. Oh wait, he died. He died, didn't he? That's enough closure, I guess. Its guts were relatively full, though some of the cargo had been dumped a day before in an attempt to coax more speed. Half the men were fighting their fear in search of sleep, buried beneath woolen blankets and curled up between the thwarts. He did research this. Thwarts. I see it's as big as mine. The rest lined the walls, watching sea and rail. Sea and rail? No, that was my spandex, not his typo. Watching sea and sail with equal anxiety. Pressed against the prow, the elf called Nista was wrapped in wool and cloaked in an oilskin coat she had taken from the personal chest of a dead man. Woohoo! Nista. I know that name. Still not ruling out the possibility that she drank the blood, though. Bad luck, the men said, to take the belongings of a dead man. Bad for him, she'd return. Not for me. Classic Nista. The cold wind snapped at her cheeks as she lifted her hooded head to peer across the length of the longboat. She was small for an elf, though more tightly muscled than most, where the crew wore thick wool tunics and jerkins of bright colour. Wore, not were. Where the crew wore thick wool tunics. Although now I have a weird Pixar vibe from this story, like the ship is actually crewed by animated clothing. Actually, that's creepy as fuck. Anyway, where the crew wore thick wool tunics and jerkins of bright colour, her clothes were more suited to the streets of a city. Once, the pants and jacket she wore had been the uniform of a guild of royal assassins. It had been patched and repaired too many times, however, and was now barely recognisable as such. Covering the battered uniform were dozens of pouches and sheaths, and while some were empty, many were not. The number of knives she carried had, at first, amused the crew, but not anymore. Sheltered beneath the hood, her hair was twisted into long locks of black through which many strips of cloth were knotted, trophies of battles she'd survived and lessons she wanted to remember. Coffee-coloured face was marred by a scar which began at the corner of her mouth and tore up to a point just below her eye before jagging out toward her ear. Another lesson, one which left her smile, when she smiled, looking like a cruel grin. Whether she was beautiful or ugly, the crew had been unable to decide, but they discovered how dangerous she was when she cut the fingers of the first who'd moved too close after being told she didn't like to be touched. I'm guessing she cut the fingers off the first guy, but that's a minor thing. I'm mostly interrupting myself here to say this was a really cool intro. It really is classic Nista. He'd lost his fingers, but it wasn't Nista who killed him a few nights later. It was them. The Draug. I'm sorry, but I do not know how to pronounce that. Is it uncool to not know how to pronounce Draug? Meh. First signs of trouble came when the yellow lights bubbled on the horizon sometime before dawn. Not the kind of lights which come with the rising sun. Sickening to look at, they reminded the elf of the gelatinous orbs Chucksheen cast for light. I still laugh when I read the name Chucksheen. It's classic. Also, is this something to do with the magic cast by the vampire lord Skur? Read and find out, I guess. But they were hovering below the waves, floating along like massive glowing eyeballs, a dozen or so at a time, winding through the water, threading the current. They followed the longboat for hours. "There are guardians," the captain told her. "Keep us safe from any Caspi bastard stupid enough to sail the Sea of Blood." Sea of Blood. So that fits. The first Draug attack within the steel-grey light of dawn. Clawed over the edge without warning, grabbed one of the crew and bit into his throat, tore it wide open with a wet snarl, and then dragged the screaming crew member back into the sea, where waves foamed crimson and bubbled gore. In the silent shock, 2 more were taken. Then the elf was moving. She moved through the boat, a flaw in the glass in one hand, beyond the wall of sleep in the other. The venomously enchanted blade tore Draug to pieces, but it wasn't easy. The crew, mostly seasoned raiders, fought well once they started. Axes and sword quickly cut the first wave of Draug apart, but not without a cost. 4 more, dead or dying. And we have our mask pull for page break. And the floor of the boat slippery with blood and body parts. I don't understand, the captain said. They never attack us, never. They came again a few hours later, again that night. Now, 5 days into their voyage, the light seemed to fill the sea, as far back as the horizon in the small boat's wake, and they were steadily getting closer. One more night, she heard Happy saying, young, red-haired and eager, not as afraid of the Draug as the other. Happy, H-A-P-I. With Mister as grumpy and the confused troll as dopey, we're really getting somewhere with this. Just gotta make it one more night. Won't happen. One-eyed man with heavy knuckles and a face which looked like it had been chewed on by a troll. A confused troll? No, forget it, sorry. Small, tight-cropped beard on his chin. The rest mostly stubble shot through with grey. He'd been good with his axe, he thought. Real good. Said his name was Max. M-A-K-S, that is, not M-A-X. Said it in a way which made her think he had had other names before. Bastards will come again tonight, and there'll be too many of them. Fuck you, Max, Happy growled. Don't say that, now it'll happen. Happy to the max. Sorry, moving on. Was gonna happen anyway, boy. I ain't no boy, you saw me. I killed 3 on my own. Killing don't make you a man. If it did, I'd wager that elf over there would be finding it hard to walk. He waved his axe toward her. Never let the weapon go. She understood that, respected it. On account of her balls would be in the way of her feet. A couple of others laughed, though it felt forced. A wave slid up behind the boat, dragging the vessel along its crest. The elf felt her stomach lurch as the boat angled sharply, then lifted with almost equal intensity before rolling steadily for a while. The seasickness which had plagued her the first few days was almost gone, squeezed from her body on a river of adrenaline and fear. She'd managed to eat some of the crew's porridge this morning, which they'd been happy to share. Since fighting began, they'd seen her as less of a paying passenger and more as one of them, especially when, without a word, she'd taken a place at one of the oars to keep the numbers even. It hadn't been easy. Her body was used to different kinds of labour. Her stomach and back ached. But they needed speed when the winds had died down, so she rowed without complaint. Her violet eyes found the captain, his arm tied useless to his chest. One of the Draug had torn it open from elbow to shoulder. Only some quick thinking by the sour-faced Nemo had kept him alive. Nemo. Captain or finding? All the same, he lay at the rear of the boat, pale face and eyes closed. Spent the night studying stars and compass. During the day, he watched the sun. I'll get you home, lads, he said, too often. No one believed him anymore, but they weren't going to tell him that. The sky above was mostly blue, streaked with flimsy patches of white and grey. But, with summer creeping away quickly, it didn't translate into warmth, even in the prow, which captured most of the light. The 2 female crew, dark-haired Ainu and blonde-haired Saja, had shuffled forward to fill the places of some of the dead, and possibly to be closer to their passenger. They'd given her some lessons on how to work the ropes and to fulfill some of their lesser duties. She felt she'd never be good at it, but forced herself to learn as quickly as she could. I'm not sure who that is. They're talking about Mr. Gary? I don't know. The cold had been terrible during the night, made worse by the lack of awnings, but the elf had begrudgingly advised the crew it wouldn't be a good idea. If the Draug breached the sides of the boat and they all got caught under the awning, they'd have no chance against the undead creatures. So Draug are undead. Instead, they slept closer than normal, pressed against each other where they could. And they had extra blankets, though some refused to use those, which had been owned by the dead. At night, Ainul pressed against the elf and snored loudly, loud enough that the elf had more than once considered putting a knife through the young woman's throat and dumping her overboard. I know the feeling. Would eventually turn onto her back, looked up through the rigging at the stars, and felt a wave of peacefulness like nothing she'd ever felt as they glinted down at her. I'm not sure what's going on in that sentence, so I'm going to pull my mask down again and have a good down think about it. Since the start of the trip, she'd had more chance to look at the sky. Wasn't much else to look at, she allowed, and she noticed that the worms which infected her body seemed to relax when she looked up at the cool, dark expanse. It was as if, for those moments, they weren't there and her body was entirely her own again. These are not actual worms, by the way. It's a magic thing. You need to read the other books, but I don't know. Maybe it's intentional that the reader should think that she has worms at this point. So I'm sorry to spoil that. She doesn't. Well, she may have worms. I don't know. She did eat a lot of weird stuff in the first books. Often she found herself thinking of her husband, lost to her now, his body resting in the dirt near a small cabin alone in the Deadlands. Did Talek's spirit watch her from the shadowed halls? Question mark. Had he seen everything she'd done? What did he think of her now? How do you like me now? Yeah, that was that's. I'm going to stop at that point. We'll go on to the next chapter, or the next half of the chapter with the next video. But I think I'm just about out of time now, so I'm going to stop it again here. And I think this one went nicely as well. I think I only pulled my mask down. Was it twice? Well, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.